In this video, I'm going to show you how to use the adjustment layer masks to create adjustments to your various layers, but in a non-destructive way so that you can always edit and change it in the future. So for this, what you're really going to want to do is use the layers palette. And you don't actually need to worry too much about what version or what kind of setting the layer is on. So it doesn't matter if it's a smart object or if it's a raster object. And it'll make sense in a little bit. So at the very bottom of the layers palette, I'm going to make this a little bit smaller so it's easier for us to see. There are these various icons. You already probably know the trash icon, the new layer icon, and the group layer icon. But these two are layers that we're going to be using. There is a layer mask, which hides portions of it or can reveal portions, and the adjustment or fill layers. And what this does is it allows us to create adjustments to a layer or multiple layers, but since it's its own specific layer, we can adjust and play around with that in the future, as well as hide and delete it. So when I click the this button, the adjustment layer, it'll give me a variety of options. And some of these options you should already know from adjustments. So we'll go to my favorite. Let's go to some hue and saturation. Right now, and what it usually does, it'll open up the properties pretty instantly. Notice how it's created its own little mini layer. So let's play around. I'm going to zoom out a little bit and we'll do as usual. We'll change the colors. Actually, I'm pretty happy with that. So I'm going to lower the saturation because I want this kind of dull. And let's make this feel kind of moody and dark. And I'm going to change the yellows a little bit. There we go. So I'm going to close the properties palette, and we're going to focus in again on the layers palette. Notice how it's its own layer, and I can turn that on and off just as I would any other layer. I can also change the opacity if I want it to be less strong, and or I can raise that if I want it to show 100%. The other thing that's cool about creating these sort of adjustment layers is that since this is its own layer, I can move it around. So I'm going to turn off this one, and I'm going to turn on the two that I've edited, and I'm going to put my adjustment layer in between them. Notice how it's only changing the background, but it's not changing the figure because the figure is its own layer. But I can move that figure layer beneath that, and it'll change the figure. That wasn't a big change because I didn't have the colors, but if you pay attention to the shoelaces, you'll notice the change as I flip this back and forth. See, yellows, switching to blues. Yellows, blues. So this can be very helpful, specifically if you want to make some changes, but you're not quite sure where you want to change things, or if you're going to change it later in the future, because it will be a lot of work to undo a whole lot of things. The other thing that can be very helpful with this is you can adjust the layer mask and decide what you want to reveal, how much you want to reveal, and you can edit that later. So notice if I'm in the layers, I can click on where the layer thumbnail usually is, or I can click on the layer mask. And right now it's all white, meaning that it's showing everything. It's showing the hue and saturation changes. But while I'm on there, if I paint with black or white, and I can paint using the paint bucket tool or the paint tool or any paintbrush-like tool, and I can get a variety of different changes. So let's size up a brush, and I'm going to paint. Notice how it is showing this black area where I've painted in black. And what black does is it hides that layer mask. So it's actually hiding the adjustments that I made in that area. So that can be really neat. And so you can do some pretty cool stuff like creating a gradient that when I add the gradient, I want it to only hide portions of it. You can see again in my little thumbnail that it's dark on this side, meaning it's hiding the changes but showing the changes over here. One other way that we can use this is that if I create a selection, so I'm going to create a super rough selection of this person's shirt. And that's a bad selection. You probably should never do one that rough. But what I can do is I can come to the layers and I can tell it that I want to make a new adjustment layer. And I'm going to make an adjustment layer. This time, all I want to change is the brightness and contrast. Notice that when I change this, it's only going to make the adjustments where I've made that selection. So I've made that darker using the properties in the property bar. But when I look at my thumbnail, really the only part that's showing is that little white selection that I've made. All the rest of it is the hidden part of black. So it's not affecting anything below it. But as we can see that this isn't super accurate. I messed up on a couple of areas, but that's okay. I can click on to the layer mask. Oops. I can change my tool to maybe a brush tool. And right now it's on black, so it's going to hide things. I could change it to white and I can reveal things, and I can mess up and then I can change it again to black and I can hide things. So this can be a very fluid way of creating a variety of different adjustments, and adjustments that you can play around with, you can move, and you can hide. Last tip of advice is, since there's going to be so many layers, it's a smart idea to start grouping things and group things together. So I'm going to group this all these things together so that they're all a part of that same thing. And that way I can hide that group and I know that those are all things that are working together. They're all color changed in that way. And if I wanted to single out that person, maybe I would bring I would have to change the person. But notice if I bring the person above that layer, it's going to change the colors. Notice how his shoes are back to yellow. So keep in mind where your adjustment layers are, where you have grouped things, and what effects you want to have, because the adjustment layer affects everything beneath it. Luckily, you can always duplicate a layer and its properties, so you can add that layer a couple times.